everyone, my name is Bailey and today we're going to go over chapter 15, which is video games. Starting on that first slide, we're going to define what a video game actually is. The textbook describes a video game as a visual stimulus that is accessed through a digitally mediated system. Essentially, you can either download software or the actual game onto a portable device, such as a personal computer, tablet, smartphone, or you can actually purchase the hardware that's connected to the software system, another sort of platform or console as we call them. Going on to that next slide, we're going to go over some basic technological requirements. Firstly, there must be some sort of display. The display is either your television screen, your laptop screen, the screen of your mobile device, or other mobile gaming system. Next, there must also be a microprocessor or something to actually run the game on. The game software itself, which is the game, and then another form of input device such as the controller, keyboard, things like that. Alright, on the next slide, this is an overview or a visual representation of the history of video games directly taken from the textbook. As you can see, the computer games, portable games, and console games are represented with their own timeline to show how they progressed in comparison to the other platforms. For some basic video game history, Willie Higginbotham was a nuclear physicist with the Department of Energy that experimented with tennis game for which he developed on an analog computer. Can anyone actually guess what video game this is? It's Pong, the very first video game. He invented this on this huge analog computer. Another big innovation for video games is Ralph Baer. He developed a video game project for the Department of Defense in the 1960s that included the first video game console, Chase. It's credited with the ability to actually be played on a television set. Alright, going on to that next slide. The first generation video games. Excuse me. The Magnavox Odyssey is technically the first console that released to the public in 1972. It was kind of built on switches as opposed to a microprocessor. It also included a variety of analog components to be included with the game, such as dice, fake money, things like that. Next, we also have Pong, which was more released for the public as opposed to on that huge analog computer. When you go to the next slide, you can actually see what the Magnavox Odyssey looked like. You can see that it's kind of like this big boxy console with these two smaller controllers on the side. Alright, so the rise of the consoles. This began in 1980 with media licenses. Essentially, major movie studios would license movie themes to video game companies and allow them to create a video game off of it. Next, we have the Atari 2600, which is Atari's home console that would allow consumers to insert cartridges into the console to play the different video games, as opposed to the Magnavox Odyssey, to where the games were kind of pre-downloaded onto it. Between 1977 and 1982, approximately $4 billion worth of Atari products were sold. So in the early 80s, Atari is the leader in home video game systems. However, there were some sort of business mistakes that were made, and disgruntled Atari employees decided to create Activision, one of the bigger game studio companies, even in this point in time. Alright, so business deals in the early 1980s also began to evolve that tied certain media licenses to specific platforms, making exclusive games on specific consoles. One of the more popular ones nowadays is like how Tomb Raider was originally a PlayStation-only game. The Xbox specifically has Halo on theirs. It's only as an incentive to get people to purchase the various consoles. Alright, so also we have the inclusion of the 8-bit processors, which closed the gap between the performance of large arcade machines and smaller home consoles. There's also a decline in the video game arcade market, since people are now playing video games at home instead of going to a penny arcade or things like that. Nintendo released their Nintendo Entertainment System, known as the Nintendo NES. By 1987, Nintendo actually became the best-selling game system in the United States, which also surpassed Sega's release of the Master System. Nintendo was really known for their games such as Donkey Kong and Mario Brothers. So next we have the console wars, which started in the 1990s. At this point, Nintendo is really beginning to overpower Sega in terms of their quality in the console, their video game titles. And then another huge event is Sony releasing the PlayStation in 1995. At this point, Sony and Nintendo keep one-upping each other by developing consoles with better graphics, faster processors, and better gameplay. 16-bit processors are now the norm, which is twice as fast, twice as clear as the 8-bit processors. Some huge games in this era are Sonic the Hedgehog on the Sega system, Zelda, Mario, Luigi, Donkey Kong, and of course switching over to Sony, we have Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon, Resident Evil, Final Fantasy, and Tomb Raider. One of the big questions right now is what exactly happened to Atari? They were so huge in the 80s, and then by 10 years later, they're almost eliminated from generating consoles. And they're only really licensing to platforms. All right. So on this slide, you can actually see the visual differences that Sony implemented as opposed to Nintendo and Sega. The top image is the Sony PlayStation 1, and the top is actually a compact disc that you can just pop in, play it, and it's easier to store, easier to keep clean. The center image is of Nintendo, and then you can see how it compares to the bottom image, which is Sega, how they still use the cartridges that pop into the top. They tend to get dusty, they don't work as well, and they're much harder to store just because of how bulky they are. Alright, moving on, the fourth generation video games continues. Now because Sony is now in the market, they focus more on adults. With that being said, there are more graphic images, vulgar languages, and extreme violence projected in the video games. So a rating system is now standard for PC and console games. There's E for everyone, E10, which is for everyone over the ages of 10, T for teen, M for mature over the ages of 17, and then A for adult, which is 18 and above. This rating system prevents children from purchasing a mature video game without their parents being present. At this point, Sega is also admitting defeat in the console wars, so they are completely exiting the video game industry and only focusing on software. They are also still licensing their main characters such as Sonic the Hedgehog. Another huge event is the launch of Microsoft's Xbox in 2001. The Xbox is still currently the Sony PlayStation's largest rival, or greatest rival, I should say. Sony will also enter the portable gaming market with the release of the PlayStation Portable. Again, the internet is revolutionizing the face of gaming. Massive multiplayer online role-playing games, or MMORPGs, are allowing players to play a single game but in different geographic locations. Microsoft also released their version of online gaming in 2002. The network is formally known as Xbox Live. Users pay for membership that they can go online and play with other people. Sony also started a similar system in 2006 but gave users free access to online gaming. It did change in 2013 that they did start charging for membership, unfortunately. One system that the textbook actually did not discuss is the Nintendo GameCube, which launched around the same time of the Xbox. It was significantly less popular. As I mentioned before, video games are focusing more on adults and the mature audience that grew up with video games in the 70s and 80s, while Nintendo focuses on preteens, middle school, adolescent generation, so they're more family friendly and not as popular. However, with that being said, Nintendo does make a comeback in 2006 with the launch of the Wii. Nintendo is family oriented, and they actually widened the video game market by attracting individuals that normally wouldn't play a video game. And that's generally the adults over the age of 40. The Wii featured a controller that was wireless and motion sensitive. So if you played a baseball video game, you can actually swing the remote and pretend like you're hitting the ball. Again, Microsoft and Sony tried to release their versions of it that weren't nearly as popular. It was the Xbox Kinect and the PlayStation Move. Again, they weren't very popular and they were discontinued very quickly. Nintendo was able to gain more market share because they had the original game titles that adults enjoy. Mario, Zelda, things like that. Alright, moving on to the next slide are the current visuals of the PlayStation and the Xbox. The top image is the PlayStation 4. As you can see on that controller, there is a center panel that is motion sensitive and pressure sensitive. You can touch it, click it, it vibrates, makes noises, things like that. At the bottom one, you see the Xbox One and their controller, which isn't nearly as interactive. PlayStation does actually have a little more of an edge over Xbox, with 35 million units sold since 2013, while Xbox One sales are only at 20 million units since 2013. Alright, so crowdfunding, exactly how video games are created and developed. Creating a video game requires significant investment. You have to think of there's graphic designers, digital engineers, a creative team, a team that develops more of the storyline versus characters, and then you have a team that makes the missions, and all this goes into the actual video game itself. So the ability to raise funding from prospective customers before the completion of the game significantly reduces the economic risk to smaller game developers. Plus, it allows for a commercial appeal to find funding. Steam Greenlight allows game designers and developers to appeal directly to their audiences for assistance and funding in the completion of their game projects, usually in return for something like you get a licensed logo t-shirt or you get a pre-release to the game. There's all sorts of rewards for things like that. The specific saying is to vote with your dollars or purchase demos of the game to show your support. Video game producers must sell the game and then make the game. And then there's also all sorts of websites, programs for you to log in and actually test the video game before it's released to help the company find any sort of bugs or glitches in the system. There's all sorts of names like alphas and betas, and to be honest, I don't know all of them. Alright, so some recent achievements for video games. There's wireless service now available for portable gaming systems, specifically for the PSP and Nintendo DS. Xbox has not released one, and Sony did admit that they're no longer going to be making new models or supporting the current models. So for wireless service, you can take your portable gaming system, hook it up to Wi-Fi, and still play with your friends as you travel. Another big thing is Nintendo released a Nintendo Switch system. It's a portable console that can be hooked up to your TV for your home play, or you can take it along with you and the sides detach into two little controllers, so that way you can travel on an airplane and play with your friend next to you. It's kind of cool. Downloadable content is now available on all consoles, specifically the Xbox, PlayStation, and Wii systems. Users can log into their network, download a video game directly to the console, and it saves users a lot of time, money, and physical storage. Again, there's also more costing strategies of recent video games released on platforms and consoles. When a player purchases a video game, the average cost is probably around $60 maybe, and this is just for the actual disc that you can insert into your console, download it, play it. However, there's more in-game purchases being available now. So as you're playing, you can spend an extra $10 and get a cool outfit for your character, or another weapons pack, or even I've seen in some games like Assassin's Creed, you can purchase an extended copy of the game, like 4 or 5 more missions that just add on to that story. It's a method for games to keep being expanded or constantly updated even after they've been released, which is kind of cool, but then it also is a downfall for players because then you have to keep purchasing things just to play the game. All right, next we also have video game parents. These are now adults that grew up in the 1980s and 1990s with a console in their home, so therefore they are more apt to purchase a console or video games for their children. There's also, these parents are against any video game legislation that prohibits certain graphic video game content because they want video games. All right, so some trends to watch in the video game industry. This is going to be the Oculus Rift headset, which actually released in 2016 as a virtual reality game system. You basically get like a virtual reality headset and you can watch it and feel like you're actually in the game. Google Cardboard also released in 2016 as a cheaper means for that. You basically get the parts to make it and you just put your smartphone in it and you use your smartphone to play the game. The tablet market could also have an effect on the gaming industry since there are so many more downloadable games through the App Store that you only pay $1 or $2 for, or even a lot of them are free. And you can access it anytime, anywhere, with or without wireless connection. Finally, there may be some possible legislation, particularly relating to young adults and teenagers committing crimes after playing violent video games. However, as I mentioned previously, there are video game ratings set into place, just like movies, that prevent children from purchasing those games without the presence of a parent. And with the video game market being tailored more towards adults, we probably won't see much in the way of that. All right, so the question for you, or all of you I should say, is do you think video games are a relevant form of communication or just a form of entertainment? And if you do believe that they are a form of communication, how have they facilitated communication? Again, we're talking any sort of PC gaming, console gaming, mobile device gaming. All right, and of course, wrapping this up, the references and... All right, and then that's all I have for you guys. I really appreciate you watching this video, and I look forward to reading your comments. So, thank you.